ISB show. Sahil Rahi here. Gold Cup group phase in the books. So now, Rahi, we're going to do a quick recap of what happened and cover the bracket for the quarterfinals that's coming up. But first things first, because before we talk about the teams that made it, Rahi, we got to talk about the one team that will not be joining us that we've been highlighting a lot. Disappointment of the first round has to be the Jamaica Reggae Boyz.
Yeah, the most surprising story for me of this Gold Cup is the capitulation of this Reggae Boyz team coming off a great performance in the Unity Cup, a bang start to World Cup qualifiers, and then a really, really poor performance in this Gold Cup, Sa.
This is what we keep complaining about, right, Rahi, with this Jamaica Reggae Boyz team. So much hope, so much excitement, and we're all like, now this is when the Reggae Boyz are going to take it to the next level. This is the Gold Cup. We're going to feed off the awesome performances that they had during the Unity Cup, and then it turns into a disappointment. All started in the Guatemala game and finishing it off in a Panama game that was utterly disappointing.
Very strange. After beating the same Guatemala team handily at the office, then to come to this tournament and really lose to the same team, very strange. I mean, I understand some important players were missing. Of course, Mason Holgate not there. I think they missed Isaac Hayden as well. But still, I mean, it's more or less the same team. Very strange to see the inconsistency. And yes, against Panama, never really looked in this game. I thought it was strangely refereed. They had a couple penalty shouts that were not given their way, but still really a boring Jamaica team this tournament.
And I think Steve McLaren needs to be questioned as well. You know, in this particular match, the Jet Cephas, who was not as strong as he was in the Unity Cup, but still he doesn't start this match. And you're thinking, well, what's going on here? Kind of strange decisions as well.
Question marks about McLaren have been there. They continue to be there. He hasn't answered them yet, but it all comes down to World Cup qualifying. That's all that matters.
Yeah, and Jamaica, obviously, for World Cup qualifying, they've been given a very favorable group. So now the expectation is, look, Jamaica, you have to get through this group. They're the favorites in this group. But based on this performance, right, a lot needs to change between now and then.
100%.
Yeah. So moving forward now to the teams that did make it, of course, the winning the groups were Canada, US, Mexico, and Panama. And, you know, it was interesting because they all did it a little bit differently, Rahi.
But none of them convincing. All very disappointing, I think, if you're a fan of any of these teams. Starting with the US, let's say, very disappointing performances. Yes, the big victory in the first game, but then largely survived against Saudi Arabia, got the one goal, were decent against Haiti, but again, not an impressive performance considering the mistake from Matt Freese, the goalkeeper. So, look, maybe it's as best as you could expect from the US considering their recent performances, but nothing to write home about. And if I'm Mexico, feel the same way, right? You know, getting a tie against Costa Rica. Yes, the late disallowed VAR decision, but still nothing impressive. And to be honest, we talked a lot about how good Canada was coming to this tournament, how they are the favorites. But you have to say, very disappointing in the group stage.
After the first match. So we came off and, the first match, we talked about it. We talked about it in a previous video where we said this team, after the 6-0 thrashing of Honduras, we thought, okay, this team is the team to beat. They are the favorites. They're going to go and win this Gold Cup. And then the next two matches showed you that, wait a second, let's hold our horses here a little bit, because what happened in the next two matches was very different from the first match, right?
Yeah, I think you throw out the El Salvador match because it's very strange with 9 men. El Salvador gets 2 men sent off. But the Curaçao game is the one where you have to really ask big questions, because that game was very much Curaçao deserved to draw. They could have scored more. They had a couple situations they were unlucky, I thought, not getting penalties. It was a very dicey Canadian performance, particularly defensively.
Yeah.
Looked really in shambles. I think for me, what we've learned about this Canadian team through 3 games is that they're the same as these other 2 CONCACAF teams, US and Mexico, in that there is no depth across any of these teams. In that second game, you sit Tejan Buchanan. He doesn't start. The team looks a shade below.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And the thing is, you saw in the El Salvador match, right, when they went up by 2 goals and the game was essentially done, you see the big names that they're bringing in. So it's not like the depth is not there. I think that the issue is that these performances sometimes are not really up to par with the name on the back of the shirt. Now,
Yeah,
the more,
maybe,
yeah,
but I,
yeah,
I think the drop off from top tier to second tier with all these teams, the US, Canada, and Mexico, is really big.
yeah.
And that could be a problem when you think about heading into World Cup, injuries, just minutes, yellow cards that you accumulate in the tournament. I think that's a real concern for all these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big thing with regard to that. Now, of course, Canada will get Eustachio back because of
Yeah,
a weird thing that Porto didn't get very far in the Club World Cup, and I think that should help the team out quite a bit.
absolutely.
And lastly, we'll also mention that Panama without Coco Carrasquilla, without Fajardo, they're still doing very well, and which brings me to the point of here's what things look like, right? Here's what it looks like, and this is how it'll all shape out in terms of the bracket. You see the matchups there where who everyone's going to play. So, based on that, my question to you, my friend, is: so who are the favorites moving into this quarterfinal round?
I mean, it's exactly what you said. I mean, if we're being honest and if we're being fair and we're judging based on the group stage, we did a disservice talking about Canada, Mexico, and the US because we didn't talk about the team that looked the best in the group stage, and that was Panama. And absolutely right, doing it without Carrasquilla, who is not only their best player, in my opinion, but one of the best players in the region. So you talk about a team doing it with depth. That's Panama. So I really have to say, and it's a strange thing to call them favorites, but on performances, you have to say Panama has been the most impressive team. Caveat that, and I will say I still think Mexico are the favorites.
Yeah.
But Panama really deserving of that after the group stage.
I think it's very interesting. I think this is very interesting the way the tournament is shaped out, and it's going to set up into kind of interesting stories in both halves of the bracket, right? So we talked before the tournament in our preview video. We talked about, okay, US, Mexico, they've been the dominant forces in these Gold Cups. But now the Canadians and the Panamanians are saying, we are here as well. But they need that big victory over these teams in a tournament that matters. And regardless of what people say, this tournament matters. They need that big victory over those rivals to be like, okay, these teams can actually be considered on the same level as the US and Mexico.
Yeah. And they both get the perfect opportunity, right? If they win their games, which they likely will, it'll be Panama against Mexico, which is exactly the game Panama needs to prove that they're at the next level, right? This is the opponent they need to beat. And on the other side, Canada, the US in the semifinal is exactly who Canada needs to beat. It's a little different for the Canadians because I think they have to win the tournament. Panama, I think if they beat Mexico in the semifinal, assuming both those teams win, then I think you're looking at a successful tournament for Panama. Canada, on the other hand, has to win the tournament, in my opinion.
Yeah. And final notes on the US, of course, right? It sets up an interesting match that their first match against Costa Rica without their best player. But the US should win this, and then it should set up a very fascinating semifinal where, this US B team, regardless of whatever you want to say, B team or what have you, the expectation is now that you go and win the tournament, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, the expectation, yeah, but I wouldn't put them as favorites.
Yeah.
Based on the performances, based on the roster, I mean, I think if you had to do a ranking of the favorites, they'd probably be fourth, right?
Yeah, fair. Based on the players that have actually showed up, right? So you have it as Mexico, you're going Panama, Canada, US.
I no, honestly, I think the ranking should be Panama, Canada, Mexico, the US. But I think that Canada, the challenge is, can you really beat Mexico when it matters? And that's what I'm not sure about, if the Canadians can do it, nor if the Panamanians can do it, right? So performances, roster-wise, Canada, Panama have looked good. But for me, it's hard to pick against Mexico when it matters.
Yeah, 100%. So everyone out there, it's about to enter a very fascinating part of the Gold Cup tournament. And this is the part that matters. So for all of you enjoying the Gold Cup, please subscribe to the channel. Keep watching these videos. Rahi, final thought before we wrap up and get ready for the quarterfinals.
Crazy red cards, VARs, typical CONCACAF tournament. Disappointing for the Jamaicans, impressive for the Panamanians. I think those are the big stories from the first round.
Yes. And as always, keep watching the Gold Cup. Keep watching the beautiful game. We'll see you guys soon.